just gotten through the introduction.
Yes.
Right. It's very pretty. I mean, the landscape looks like a bit romantic, but not inaccurate, doesn't it, for Arctic Norway?
Now, what would you think about more reconstructions being done in a more artistic style, kind of like that? Cell animation versus kind of our traditional watercolor 3D animation.
Yeah, it's nice. I think it's evocative, isn't it? It kind of puts you in there.
I think one of the things that the developers have said a lot about the game is that they don't try to be accurate, but they try to be authentic to get that feeling of what it was like or what it might have been, and to kind of put these great narratives into that scene. So this is the way which most of the story is told, is through these kind of sections of the banner. And within that you basically get given like either or questions, and you get to describe how these unfold. This character is called the Scrivener, and he's like the writer, and he records everything that happens.
So we've got some merchants now as well.
Yes, so we're pulling up to make a base right now. And then the Ravens are a mercenary group. But they also include a lady called Juno, who's going to become quite important to the story in the sense that she's a magical, she's a mender, but she basically has magic imbued within her.
Are we actually told where this is taking place? It's just in a sort of mythological Scandinavian world.
Yes, so I'll plot the map once we get the ability to do that and show you. But it's basically based loosely upon the sort of like Kattegat and sort of extended region from there, in terms of the visual aesthetic as well as the kind of placement of things, but it's not directly correlated.
Right, yeah. Some of them realistic. I'm not so sure you could make a bell out of obsidian. That'd be challenging.
Just because you can't.
So along the way there are a lot of these artifacts that you can pick up, and they all have different properties, and a lot of them have runic inscriptions on them as well, although a lot of them are a bit too difficult to read.
Looks like a piece of hacksaw.
It does, well, artistically it doesn't look awful back, does it? It's not far. Far wrong.
And the sword pommel looks reasonable.
The knockback on it.
Yeah.
Right, so we'll go over and meet this guy, because he's one of the berserkers, and he has a shield maiden which travels with him, which is kind of interesting. Oh, and this is also Juno, the magical character.
Right.
Well, witchcraft is an important theme.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's archaeological and documentary evidence for Saga evidence.
What archaeological evidence is there for witchcraft?
Well, people have interpreted some of the amulets found in graves as being related to witchcraft, particularly some of the herbs and potions that have been preserved from Oseberg, and there are certain staffs that have been found in graves that have actually been seen as sorceresses' staffs.
Have been interpreted, reinterpreted over and over again over time. What these kind of complex sort of associations of different sorts of objects, particularly associated with sometimes with women, sometimes with men, but with sort of ambiguous sort of gender associations.
Yes.
Exactly what they mean. So they were thought of as cooking spits, weren't they?
Yes.
And then they became magical staffs. But there are certainly women who were doing strange things if their grave goods can be believed.
Yes.
I think one of the things that I really like is a lot of the jewellery and detailing. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit towards whether we would expect to actually see that in use, or whether we'd see those more as grave goods, or what would be happening in terms of this jewellery in terms of everyday wear, and would we expect to see them in these contexts?
Well, it's a difficult question in some ways, because the grave goods are that's the association in which we see the full set together. So we have to believe it in some sense that it reflects life. Of course, they're kind of produced tableaus that are doing something particular. It's not a random snapshot of everyday life. But we think the brooches are used in that way, don't we? We have these large oval brooches, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm sure they're going to appear at some point. These big round oval brooches that appear on the shoulder of women's dress, and are often strung together with a string of beads or something like that. We do find large collections of beads in graves as well, often on the chest. Sometimes actually it looks like they're being used in the hair as well, for sort of holding your hair up as part of some sort of bunch, for want of a better term.
Yeah. And the cloak pins that we saw earlier must have been in everyday use, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to hold your cloak on. So they're probably, like in her costume there are elements there that it's her sort of folk costume for Sunday best, that she wouldn't be wearing all those things on a daily basis. But a lot of the jewellery does have a sort of quite functional role in just holding your clothing together, so you've got to wear it.
And how about, we see most of them wearing sort of cloth-based clothing, but he's obviously got a bear skin wrapped around him. Would we expect to see more furs or more cloth, or what sort of clothing would they have been wearing?
Well, we know that the fur trade is big business. I mean, it's very difficult to spot archaeologically, and what we tend to see is things going in the other direction, the things that are traded for it. But it looks like things like furs are being traded out of Scandinavia, particularly out to the north, and are going all the way down through Europe into Russia, and down even into the sort of Byzantine south, the sort of Mediterranean area. And so there's a big trade in that, but it's just not quite clear how much fur you'd expect to see in this kind of period. Like, you would expect people in Norway must be wearing fur.
Yeah. And you probably have quite a lot of furs on your bed to keep warm at night as well, rather than just as dress.
And no doubt different sorts of fur are used by people of different statuses, just as we have records for that sort of thing later in time in the medieval period. But the detail of it we don't really know.
In terms of the textiles, the impression often in reconstructions is that it's very brown and grey and drab, but actually we know from dyes that it was often really vivid and bright colours, lots of really bright reds and bright blues.
I think there's a reference somewhere to the blue-shirted Northman.
Oh, really? Interesting.
It doesn't fit with your idea at all.
No. This lady here is a really interesting character in that part of her narrative talks about when she was born, her dad had been so convinced that he wanted a son to carry on his lineage that he gave her a boy's name. And they get into this big narrative about the value of gender in the society, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about whether we have anything from the archaeological record that would indicate the preference for sons or daughters, or what the sort of gender roles in the time were.
Well, we spoke a little bit already about the idea of sort of warrior women, and there is a kind of romantic ideal of there being a sort of not a gender equality, but a sort of a freedom for women in the Viking Age, which is different to what came before and what came after. It's a bit of a romanticised idea, which largely comes out of the sort of the Victorian scholarship, which saw the Norman takeover of England as being a very oppressive, sort of the famous Norman yoke, a very oppressive idea, and that the Viking society was much more free than that. And certainly there are ways in which there was freedom. In other words, famously that women in Iceland are allowed to divorce, for instance. But we're not talking about a sort of an enlightened, gender-balanced society in the way we would like to think, I don't think.
No, the sort of warrior society is probably very male-dominated.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I suppose it's true that while a lot of the males were away fighting in armies, the women would have had to take quite important roles on in terms of in charge of the farmstead and in charge of the home.
And there have been suggestions that one of the practices that happened in the Viking Age was a preferential killing of female children, because they weren't seen as valuable in the same way that male children were. There's actually very little evidence for that at all.
Right. We also have a character that we're just about to meet now, Ludin. We get into an interesting narrative in that the kingdom which he's from inherits the Jarldom or the kingship, whereas in certain other ones it's done through fighting, and whoever is the victor takes on that role. And it's kind of looked down upon that he got it through being blood, basically, not through his own abilities. And I was wondering again if there was evidence of that. Obviously with the Vikings TV series we see a lot with Ragnar sort of taking over by force, and whether we would expect to see more through bloodlines or more through combat ability or something else indeed.
think family and kinship are important, obviously, but it is quite a sort of a flexible society in some ways. That you can see that if you believe the sagas, that there's enough evidence of people rising up and becoming powerful in their own right, not from nothing, but from wealth and privilege to take over. The sort of glory and the support that you get from winning battles kind of snowballs, and that can give you a sort of a power which can allow you to topple over the people, the next village along. So I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm sure. And we don't really have evidence for any really long-lived dynasties.
No,
it seems that
no.
people can quite easily achieve power, presumably through successful raiding and gaining silver.
One of the sagas about Orkney, a saga called Orkney Inga Saga, is full of references to this guy who's basically a gangster. He's just behaving like the mafia, and just no one seems to be able to control him. He's not officially ever Earl, but he's behaving as if he is.
Yeah.